Bueno, vamos ahora con la última.
Okay, towards the final presentation before the coffee break. Presentation is going to be in charge of Carlos Suarez, Manager of Sustainability, Politics and Innovation from the U.S. Grain Council. He worked with the Council as regional consultant for ethanol in Latin America, promoting the benefits and advantages of ethanol of the United States in global energetic transmission. Before the Council, he worked as Associate Director for the Development of Businesses in Latin America, with like Nature Conservancy, and is a specialist of commercial services of the United States and economic specialist for the State Department in Colombia. Has a license degree in international businesses from the Universidad del Rosario, Management of Global Risk in Spain, and an MBA in Canada. Carlos will talk about the efforts of the Council to improve the knowledge of the sustainable production practices in the United States. Carlos, you have the floor. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much for being here today. I promise that by the end of our presentation, if you stay with me, we're going to have a delicious coffee break. It's just a little bit, only 30 minutes. Today, I would like to start telling you a story, a real story that happened in a place similar to this one with nutritionists. And in one of these conferences, one of these nutritionists is doing his presentation and telling everything he knows about the products. And somebody raises their hand and asks, what happened? How sustainable is your product? And that expert in nutrition starts thinking, and you don't know how to start. He doesn't know how to start to answer. And so the idea is that you deal with me and understand the processes of what happens when we're thinking about sustainability. So in the current context, what does being sustainable mean? It's a very simple concept with a definition by the United Nations that is basically to satisfy the needs that we have in the present, guaranteeing that we have the resources for the future generations. But when we begin to talk about this, we're talking about food, housing, we're talking about a lot of things. And at what level? Not only about this, talking about basic needs, but also in what context. That's when we see that things get difficult, because it's not the same as countries like India with a high population, China also, and compared to countries that have obtained advanced levels of development like the United States and the European Union, or the emerging countries like ours in Latin America and Africa. So context, needs, we try to understand how to start to talk about sustainability. We all know that when we listen to the news, that there are being developed different frameworks on how to approach to that complex aspect. When we talk about food, we can see that the DSGs have defined certain actions that we have to do if we want to obtain that sustainability level, and to avoid those situations that at that moment Thomas Matus concerned the humanity regarding the capacity to really feed a growing population at the time. Fortunately, the technology and different advancements enable the humanity in a way to overcome that challenge to feed much more people, talking about the Green Revolution. But today we are facing a new challenge, the concept of planetary limits that we hadn't heard before. So we have scientific organizations that are saying that there's a certain capacity in different dimensions that the planet can really supply. Among that, the integrity of biosphere, chemical aspects, and other things like climate change in that circle that you see here that indicates the color we're more or less concerned we should be. So in that sense, we find ourselves in a framework, in a systemic framework, where sustainability cannot be analyzed individually, but inside the systems where we are, where the key elements associated to the food include the chain that you all know, but also are highlighted in among other regulatory forces like politics, economic systems, demands, and supply and demand that we find them in the market, as well as the environmental factors. So we have to focus, when we talk about sustainability, on the impacts that the food production has in the environment. In that sense, the conversation is begin to be more complex because the food production is being done in ecosystems that are in a critical risk, where there's a huge concern about the erosion of the land and depleting also of the hydric resources, without mentioning those areas that are high value of conservation, where the agricultural border is being expanded or the agricultural production is creating exceeding other things that will affect the ecosystem. So that complexity is leading to the fact that in the global level, we must really be concerned of what will really affect those ecosystems, and it has to do with the uh, uh, greenhouse gas emissions. I would like to focus on the fact that when we talk about sustainability, how what comes to the first to the mind? What the greenhouse gas? The conference of parts. This is what the press shows us very extensively. And in this sense, this has to do with the science developed that has quantified that the planet is getting hotter due to the emissions in the different countries and is projected in the future. So what we're trying to do inside that the important conversation debate is to have that global warming that's zero point 0.5 centigrades that you see in a certain way is our objective, to really not alter more the ecosystems and to maintain the life relatively as we know it. We find also that the impacts and the risk that have been identified appear very specific for the land ecosystems, and that they are going to have an impact on the yields of agriculture. In this global debate has led us to the fact that different actors are focusing on the emissions as related to the activities of different parts. And what has been identified is that in the world, 25% of the emissions come from the agricultural sector. In a general sense, this can be we can dive in detail and complexity. I'm not going to talk about that graph, but basically what I'm saying is that science has quantified each one of the elements that contribute to those greenhouse gas emissions and that are being a concern when we talk about sustainability. You can see in the percentage distribution, agriculture represents 25%. 70% has to do with the use of energies to develop the rest of the activities that we as humanity deal with. So what does that represent for the production and food consumption? Not in general sense, but specific for the companies with which you work for, or for the customers that consume the products related with the activity you work with. Let's begin with the consumers, who recently have had our empowerment and have, due to the concern for global warming and climate change, want to lead actions, specific actions aligned with that intent of reducing the environmental impacts. There we find in the chart that you see, we see the intent of reducing the food waste, reducing water waste, and other activities related with the sustainable consumption. So we are getting near the fact that leads us to be here. The companies what are they going to do regarding sustainability? This has been analyzed for many years, and we have found that in the market there are different products with different labels that have a validity or inside the market. In this chart, you find here
You can see many products, and again, companies have realized that they're not interested in producing some of this, and they're focusing on those products that generate high trust. For instance, organic labels. However, companies, based on surveys, have discovered another very important challenge, and that challenge is that consumers are not willing to pay for sustainability regardless of them being aligned or not with sustainability in their lifestyles. So, yes, companies have to tackle that issue as well. What can we do with regards to that? So, on the third table on the slide, we can see how companies are positioning or aligning themselves with regards to what they think is most profitable and to what makes more sense. And as we can see, they are focusing on packaging, and they're also focusing on the specific attributes of the products. What attributes or what characteristics are we speaking about? Basically, we're speaking about environmentally friendly, low carbon or neutral carbon, and sustainable. And this is where we come in with regards to the sustainable sourcing. What does that mean? Basically, it means that companies, and again, this is gaining importance. Again, more and more companies are beginning to see what they call sustainability reports. In other words, they want to communicate what's happening inside their supply chains, and those are tables that we frequently see, similar to what we mentioned with regards to prices. And again, those tables indicate how frequently someone is searching in Google the word sustainability report. So yes, on one side, the professional side, or on the consumer side, or on both sides, we are seeing peak times with regards to sustainability reports for 2021. And aligned with this, companies are trying to identify how to position themselves, especially with regards to the tremendous changes that we have seen since COVID, when we used to think about sustainability only in environmental terms, but now we think about social, government, and environmental sustainability. So, with regards to the agricultural side, its supply chains, we see a scenario with more than 322 standards that want to tackle this issue. Again, 322 standards, 166 belong to the agricultural sector. So, with regards to sustainable supply, we can see that interest in this area is growing, as well as the actions that are being implemented, both with an international scope as well as with products that are focused for national change. And as you might have seen in the news, Europeans are taking or want to take the lead with regards to what sustainable consumption is supposed to mean. And in this situation, access to markets is one of these criteria. So yes, we see how this criteria relates to deforestation. We can see how this also relates to taxes based on the carbon intensity of different products. And again, this is giving us guidelines as to the importance that sustainability is gaining for businesses. So, to summarize what I have said so far, basically we have seen that there are three key spokes person, governments, people, and supply chains, and they also have three main challenges with regards to communication that have to deal or that have to that are related to the sustainability criteria, to the regulations, as well as to the guidelines for sustainable purchasing. So focusing furthermore on what I just mentioned, what are the implications that result with regards to livestock nutrition and the work that we all do? Well, first, implication is that we have to recognize the importance identified by the different actors in the system. Again, the importance of the impact of livestock activities with regards to greenhouse effect gases emission. We have also identified other factors, deforestation, water uses, or soil health. But for our specific purpose today, the most relevant one deals with climate change and with greenhouse effect gas emissions. And as many of you might have identified, bovine livestock generates the largest portion of greenhouse gases, and it is followed by swine production and so on. And specifically, you can also see the division of the different emissions related to different livestock production. We can see here enteric, fermentation, and animal nutrition that both of them represent close to 85% of the greenhouse effect gases. On the right, you can see the contribution either by methane, nitrous oxide, or carbon dioxide, but you also see two orange arrows to the left. And again, I think they relate very much to our activities. Enteric fermentation and animal nutrition is what you guys do on a day-to-day basis. So I think this is not surprising to any of you, and it's not going to be surprising if in a few months someone asks you how sustainable is your formulation, and this is why we have to be prepared for this possible conversation. So when we speak about greenhouse effect emissions, we can see that there are three scopes with regards to the emissions. The first one is with regards to companies inside the supply chain, and in the case of livestock production, this refers to the emissions that we control and that relate to the energy that we consume in our activities. But when we speak to our clients further down the supply chain, perhaps a client that is a restaurant or a supermarket, those clients would be interested in knowing which of their suppliers knowing the emissions of their suppliers, and this deals with scope number three. So again, basically this means as to how I can contribute through my activities to emissions of a third part, and this is the main point of these conversations. And again, this is because companies are seeing more and more pressure to reduce their carbon intensity. So inside this context, we are saying that the ingredients that are being used either for animal nutrition or either for human nutrition or for any other manufacturing process, again, we always want to know the carbon intensity of the process, and frequently this sustainability is being measured in those terms. And fortunately, we are developing initiatives that want to provide tools to professionals such as you, tools to respond with regards to the carbon intensity of a specific product. I'm only going to mention this database of the GFLI. This is an animal nutrition institute, and this institute takes products from different origins and compares the carbon intensity of those products to be able to conduct an analysis as to how different formulations contribute inside this criteria. So at this point of my presentation, I'm going to pause briefly to let you know that we as a council, and this is basically what I mentioned before, we as a council are going to broadcast to you the launching of a new tool that is going to allow us to work in this complex situation that I have described. Although I believe that you have heard about sustainability with regards to many other products, we as a council began to work on this topic and or began to work on this conversation. So in this sense, to mention those three actors that I mentioned before, we're going to be launching pretty soon two new products. The first one is a protocol to guarantee corn sustainability or corn sustainability assurance protocol, and also we're going to use the two acronyms for this. So these two products are based or built on the institutional strength of regulations, laws, and all other norms norms that exist in the United States to guarantee sustainability in different dimensions, not only with regards to greenhouse effect emissions, but also many other uh, areas. And the idea of this is to differentiate American products from other origins. And again, we're not only speaking about regulations now. In addition to regulations, we have private sector initiatives led by entities such as the National Corn Growers Association (NCGA) and other different corn producers association, many of which are present here today. And these associations have expressed their aspirations with regards to corn sustainability, American corn sustainability, and they have also committed to reducing the environmental impacts that are related to our activity. Again, some of these activities include greenhouse effect emissions and soil health, as well as the use of energy and water. And again, this is something that has existed for many decades and that has been measured thanks to partners such as Field to Market. Field to Market is a non-profit association that has a systemic approach to this topic, and they have demonstrated how in recent decades corn production has improved to a large extent thanks to the implementation of better production practices as well as the use of biotechnology. So we're going to be launching our two new products, and I'm going to describe these two products in the next 10 minutes. First one is CSAP, Corn Sustainability Assurance Product, and this is going to summarize regulations, best practices, frameworks, and so on, with the idea of allowing different actors in the corn supply chain to have a baseline to communicate how sustainable U.S. corn is. So this CSAP is a tool that is promoted by producers, and it is not a response to a specific regulation from any country or from any company. Instead, it wants to promote or foster producers to have this conversation under the premise of having continuous improvement. So this CSAP or CSAP tool has three different levels. The first level identifies the 11 different categories in which corn production has different environmental or social impacts, and it details the specific objectives related to each one of those impacts. And finally, it collects and describes the best practices as well as the specific laws that represent sustainability for the different impact categories. These are the 11 categories that recognize the complexity with regards to sustainability, and sustainability can change from one production area to another one. And again, it is not necessary to mention the vast area of the United States. So for each one of these impact categories, we have different improvement objectives that industries want to achieve, and again they range from greenhouse effect emissions, including electricity and water use, including the use of agronutrients and so on, and different chemicals. And this also includes the relationship with our communities, the health of our employees, and many other categories and impact areas. So as specifically, I would like to speak about soil usage, and this is very relevant if we want to differentiate corn originated in the United States versus corn originated in other areas. And this is specifically related due to what we have in the United States with regards to not producing in wetlands, protected areas, and so on, with regards to protecting the soil. And again, this is included in the U.S. regulations, and these regulations are complemented with programs implemented locally by producers, supported by this association infrastructure that exists in the private sector in alliance with the public, in alliance with the private sector. So in the protocol, you can see the description of all these practices that we have considered and that enable us to talk about sustainable corn. To conclude, I would like to make reference to what our SCE web platform is going to be. This is going to help with the implementation of the CSAP, and it is going to allow corn producers to accompany their shipments with sustainability certificates for the different volumes that they export. This way, they can comply with sustainable production requirements that different, say, supermarkets in Germany might have with regards to the ingredients of their different products. So the platform is going to have a global allocation with regards to the different volumes of corn that is produced sustainably in the United States. And this is in the platform, exporters are going to register and exporters are going to receive a proportion of those values for export. And with these certificates, they're going to transfer those certificates to be able to have traceability of the volumes that comply with the criteria that is defined in CSAP. Exporters abroad can sub-allocate different volumes depending on the processing of their different products, and somehow they will be able to be more flexible and more granular with regards to those sustainability records. So inside this framework of compliance that I have mentioned, goes from a very general level with regards to the adoption of best practices by producers and is strengthened by the institutionality of laws and regulations of the United States that want or that include the volumes that are indeed certified for soil use, biodiversity, and soil health, and this is implemented through the USDA, and it also includes the commitments assumed by corn producers when they specifically indicate that in their corn production they do not affect areas that have high levels of erosion or wetlands. Again, neither of those are affected. So again, this is the core of the definition of those volumes, and my apologies for going into the wrong slide, but going back to what I was talking about, again with regards to this narrative, real life narrative that I started my presentation with. Our intention is that, again, once someone asks the question, how sustainable is your product? Well, you will have the elements so you can have a better conversation, a more concrete conversation, trying to go beyond what we usually mean by sustainability, trying to provide additional content, and trying to be more accurate with regards to what we're speaking about. And the mission of the Council is basically developing markets and enabling trade. So through this tool, we can work with you to deal with those challenges. And when you face those challenges, we can help you dimension uh, your sustainability in your supply chain. Perhaps you might want to concentrate on greenhouse effect gases, deforestation, or soil health, because as we know in the US, sustainability in the United States is quite important, and in corn production specifically, we're just beginning to have this conversation. So yes, we want to work hand in hand with you, we want to support our partners, and we are quite thankful for you being here and for you taking advantage of this opportunity. And with this, thank you.
Carlos, gracias. Vamos a tener
Thank you so much. We have a few minutes for a few questions before we break for a snack. Somebody's raising their hand. Uh, those of you who are online, you can ask questions through the question and answer box or chat. The question is with regards to the data that you presented with regards to the contribution of live stock production. I think those figures that you presented are quite high. There's a data that indicates that agriculture for the United States is 10%. 10% contribution to the greenhouse effect gases, and livestock as a whole in the United States contributes somewhere between 2 and 3% to the greenhouse effect gases. Another thing that I would like to mention is that greenhouse effect gases can be split into CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, and the polluting power of nitrous oxide is 300 plus times more powerful than methane. Another discussion is with regards to carbon. Where does the carbon come from? Microbial activity of rumen, or does it really come from industry? Again, these are different cycles. Hydrocarbons remain in the atmosphere for 1,000 years, while the biological natural cycle of enteric fermentation collaborates to having better soils, and it only lasts for 10 years. Well, thanks for the question. Thanks for the comment. I'm going to try to respond as follows. The source of emissions of these figures is FAO, the United Nations, in other words, and perhaps the different figures relate to the graph that I presented toward my left earlier, because again it depends on what you include inside agriculture. Sometimes we include energy uses inside agriculture, sometimes it is not included, so we might have different situations. But the main point that I would like to emphasize is that yes, indeed, it is a topic that is concerning for those decision makers and for policy makers. And my role, and I do not work for the United Nations, again, our role is to try to respond and help you respond to what those policy makers might be proposing. If figures are lower, great, you can respond with a conversation that presents additional figures that might help you give specific information. But again, these environmental aspects are being presented by policymakers, and these policymakers are requiring actions from producers and so on, and they would like to reduce that. Is there a last question? There's a person towards the back that would like to ask a question. Again, we have time for one more question. Camilo? I believe that this depends on our perspective. This depends on how we interpret the situation as well. On our side, we would say yes, obviously, our production, our industry does not pollute as much as other industries do. But my main concern, and this is something that we frequently see when we speak about imports and exports, is that yes, we definitely do contribute to a large extent due to transportation. This is where our largest contribution to pollution comes from. What does transportation do? Well, basically, we're burning fossil fuels, and we are including, we are including vehicles as well as vessels. Again, vehicles on land, vessels on water. If we remove that transportation part, then our contamination is not as high. So I think that we also have to focus or see how we can present our industry with or without transportation effects. Do we have time for another question? Another comment? And I'm sure that he's going to disagree with what I just said. Well, the thing is, what are we really measuring? Emissions or carbon footprint? We have to focus on that, and we cannot shoot ourselves on the foot. No, we can't. Again, this discussion should begin with an FAO book that was presented in 2013, then 2016, and then Mindblower basically decredited all that was presented in that book. I think that we need to be more responsible with this topic. I completely agree with you. And as I mentioned before, greenhouse effect gases is only one of the dimensions that I mentioned. And as mentioned by the other person, we're speaking about a complex system. We're speaking about a complex conversation. So your beef is not with me, is against the FAO, but I completely share your frustration. And I think that we have to work together to face the challenges presented by the conversation. Thank you, Carlos. I'm sure you guys have many comments. Carlos is going to be with us tonight, so please, we can continue this conversation tonight during dinner. And again, Carlos, thank you very much for your presentation.